Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest speaker, Annabelle Brayley.
Stand by, girls and boys, we're still waiting. Good morning, Dick. Yes, we're just having a little bit of trouble picking you up. So what I will do is I'll ask you to say good morning to the boys and girls. These are the boys and girls of the Charter School of Distance Education in South West Queensland, and I'll check if they can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, boys and girls out there all around Queensland, and I suppose even further. It's Dick Smith here, and glad to be talking to you.
Good morning, Mr. Smith.
That soundbite was recorded in our schoolroom in early 1992 during the weekly whole school assembly, in which a child from each year level had an opportunity to ask Dick Smith a question. He was on a telephone in Sydney, and they were all on their HF radios in their home schoolrooms sprawled across the southern half of Queensland. In those days, students participated in a half-hour on-air lesson with their teachers each day. Although this is a relatively good, clear recording, the lessons themselves, particularly those held later in the day, were often complicated by crackling interference from intense heat, summer storms, sunspot activity, and occasionally random voices that we imagined were Indonesian fishermen illegally netting prawns in the Gulf. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, old friends, new friends, and potential friends. Thank you, Jane, Margie, Gina and Margot, for inviting me to address the second RNA High Tea. I'm both honoured and delighted to be here. Good afternoon. I've been trying to imagine where else in the world I could be in the room with our current Premier, the Governor's wife, our former Governor-General, our former State Governor, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, my mother, my daughter, one of my sisters-in-law, one of my nieces, and one of my pin-up journalists, a couple of my travel buddies, at least one of the very first students enrolled on the Charter School of Distance Education, several nurses, all of whom are my heroes, a handful of old school friends, a bunch of teachers, including those from the relevant schools of distance education, numerous home tutors, both current and retired, and a whole lot of women who contribute every day to agriculture in this country, including one of the young managers of the second largest cattle station in Australia. I see also her mother and sister, and know that among you there are several businesswomen, some carers and advocates, academics, health professionals, artists, musicians, writers and bloggers. Every one of us is a daughter. Some of us are also, first and foremost, mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, sisters, aunts, nieces and cousins. What an extraordinary group of women. Collectively, a force to be reckoned with. Writing about some of the people who live and work in remote Australia in the last few years has strengthened my conviction that most women are stronger than they think and definitely capable of extraordinary capacity when it's needed. As I was writing this a couple of weeks ago, I was actually thinking that we could probably resolve a number of issues in the world this very afternoon, had we the time. However, we don't. So instead, I'm going to talk to you about the relevance of today's schools of distance education and consequently the importance of the gift of iPads that originated in this room last year. When we were married at the end of 1980, we had a 32-volt generator for power, no television, although we did of course have ABC radio, and the only people who'd have heard me if I'd claimed to be a storyteller would have been eavesdropping on our party line. For the uninitiated, that was the long, user-maintained telephone line that zigzagged out to us from the telephone exchange in Wyandra, which was 80 kilometres west. 5 other properties shared the line, hence the potential for unintended disclosure. By the time we joined the School of the Air fraternity in 1989, we had rural power, automatic telephones, and a computer with games to introduce Chris and Chloe to the world of code, just in case the internet thing we'd heard about became a reality. We had no television reception, although we did have a TV and a video player. Friends sent us Play School and Sesame Street for the kids, and for us, episodes of Joan Collins and Linda Evans skirmishing around John Forsyth in Dynasty. From the armchairs of our isolated lounge room, they were racy, dramatic, and totally unrealistic. An entertaining figment of someone's faraway Hollywood imagination. Our local, national and international news all came to us via ABC radio, and if we didn't hear it on our ABC, it hadn't happened. And even if it had, it was also very far away that mostly we were interested but unconcerned. We had a dedicated schoolroom, the HF radio, which was provided by the school, and a timetable around which all other activities ran. A bundle of papers arrived at the beginning of each term, and all going according to plan, we completed them in fortnightly blocks and returned them on the mail truck that called on us twice a week. Teaching your own children isn't easy, but for some bizarre reason, I decided that I was the best person to tutor ours. Poor pets. Unlike my mother, who's a born teacher, my particular talent was yelling and breaking rulers on the edge of the desk. I couldn't understand why they didn't get everything I told them the first time I told them. Serendipitously, fate stepped in, and the kids enjoyed, for want of a more exactly accurate description, a productive 2.5 years with governesses before I decided to return to the schoolroom and spend a term with Chris before he headed off for boarding school. My enduring memories is the daily relief of those on-air lessons, of having them communicate with their real teachers and classmates on the radio. Despite the occasional interference, that was their personal link with their broader classroom and totally invaluable in terms of building relationships with both their teachers and their mates, most of whom they saw face to face only 2 or 3 times a year at mini schools and the annual sports muster. For many of you, this experience is familiar, and I'll warrant that soundbite brought a tear to more than one eye, because for those of us who've enjoyed membership of the extended School of the Air family, the capacity to educate our kids at home was and is integral to our very existence in rural and remote Australia. And come what may, Australia needs people living and working in the inland. In fact, we need more people living in the inland and the outback. That's not just because of food production, although continued access to clean, nutritious food is obviously crucial to our long-term sustainability. It's also about biosecurity and indeed our national security. We need more people on the ground in all those wide open spaces. There are enormous opportunities for all kinds of business to be established in rural and remote areas, but only if we do something very long-sighted about the data drought. Many of you were here last year and met Christy Sparrow, the driving force behind the Better Internet for Rural, Regional and Remote Australia, otherwise known as BER. Together with Kylie Stratton, Amanda Salisbury, Kristen Coggan and a couple of other generous souls, Christy administers the BER social media pages. In spite of its designation as social media, the BER site is by no means frivolous and has in fact well over 7,000 followers. The volunteer admins are constantly busy fielding help requests from people all over Australia who are struggling with their internet and mobile services. Access to the NBN continues to be a promise waiting to happen for most people. And despite the launch of the first Sky Muster satellite in October last year and a second one last month, there are long waiting lists to get on board and obvious frustrations with the teething issues that are challenging service providers and customers alike. Ironically, or perhaps not, communication in relation to booking installation dates and technicians actually turning up is proving one of the most vexatious problems. The BER Group is prickling attention wherever they can and already yields a fair bit of clout, but they need more. While Christy Sparrow's little black book of contacts is beginning to reflect the power of collective lobbying and their authority is growing, they can always use more support if any of you are in a position to influence outcomes. Meanwhile, back in the distance education schools of rural and remote Queensland, families continue to be challenged as they strive to achieve an equitable access to education. Thanks to some very effective lobbying by the Isolated Children's Parents Association, Queensland Council, in 1966, the Charleville School of Distance Education commenced a trial using modems to support the delivery of lessons to a grade 5 class. The experiment was considered successful enough to warrant the next year's grade 6 and 7 commencing another trial using telephones as well to enhance their on-air lessons. Evolving through various stages to current day, while all students still receive paper copies of the curriculum as well as a disc, all of the Queensland schools of distance education now utilise computers and telephones for the delivery of some of their lessons. Unfortunately, the internet capacity required to support that delivery appears to be disintegrating instead of improving, and many families in the bush have made the life-changing decision to relocate so that their children can exercise their fundamental right to a good education. And too many people are discouraged from moving to rural and remote areas because of the lack of viable, reliable telecommunications. For those of you who have fast, easy access to the technology that provides so much of our modern business, social, cultural and entertainment expectations, next time you grumble because Netflix is temporarily unavailable, spare a thought for those people who get up between midnight and dawn because they just might be able to upload or download the files that their particular business requires. Spare a thought for those people who drive endless kilometres to their nearest town just so they can get on the internet and do their essential banking. And spare a thought for those kids sitting in their classrooms in their remote homesteads and isolated communities, trying repeatedly to reconnect so they can actively participate in their lessons. About 12 months ago, when the data drought response was first ramping up, I happened to remark to Amanda Salisbury on Facebook that I sometimes thought that progress was not progressive, and perhaps we were better off with what we had in our day. She quickly keyed back. We need to live and deal in the world we're in, and our kids need to function effectively in the world they're going to be in. And of course she's right. Like it or not, the world is running on cyber, and if we can't lead the way, we must at least keep up. Last year, this function undertook to raise enough money to provide iPads for all of the children on the Longridge School of Distance Education. The day, as you've heard, was so fantastically successful, the RNA High Tea Committee provided those iPads plus enough for all of the families on Charleville Distance Ed who needed them. All of them were purchased through local businesses so that the initiative not only supported the schools, but also their local economies. The film clip you're about to view features Hugo Tully in his schoolroom at Bungendary, which is located between Quilpie and Windora. Hugo, who's in grade 4, is using an iPad, and he's going to show you how he uses his iPad, bought as a result of the RNA initiative last year.
My name's Hugo Tully, and I'm at Charleville Distance Ed. This is how I learn my spelling words on the iPad. First I go into Add Words. I get a word, for example, opportunity. Press OK, that's that word, and then I press done, next, and then you can learn your words all through here, and then once you've done that, you can test your words, where it tests your words. Opportunity, and then it says what's at the end.
Thanks to the Isolated Children's Parents Association and the Berg Group, the Tullys are currently taking part in a trial satellite project established to ascertain exactly what data and speeds are required to successfully facilitate distance education. In acknowledging and appreciating the hard work done by ICPA and Burr, Annabelle Tully says that their old service provided them with 20 megabytes at $180 a month and usually ran out after the first week of each month, causing them to be shaped, which means that their speed was then slowed down so dramatically it rendered their internet virtually useless until the new monthly cycle began. On the trial, the Tullys get 70 megabytes a month for $90, enabling Hugo and 2 of his sisters to actively participate in their daily lessons. It has also enabled Annabelle to undertake her nursing degree, studying via tertiary distance education. Professional staff retention is an ongoing challenge in our rural and remote regions. Imagine the difference it's going to make to the Quilpie community to have another trained nurse readily available, one who not only lives permanently in their district, but is tied to it by the deep and abiding love she has for her 5th and 6th generation family and the place that they call home. Instead of pulling services out of the bush, we need to expedite decentralisation. We need to rebuild the infrastructure and resources that support rural and remote population. We need to encourage people who live in the inland to stay there, and indeed we need to facilitate others to permanently relocate there. Most of all, we need to ensure our kids have the tools and resources to confidently sally forth into the world in which they will live. In this 50th year of the Charleville School of Distance Education, your gift of iPads to the families who attend their classes through the remote schools of distance education in Queensland has and will enable many of them to take their first technological steps into the future. Thank you.